Before Rolls-Royce became a symbol of unmatched luxury, before its name was spoken with the kind of respect usually reserved for royalty, it began with two very different men who understood, in their own ways, that reputation is built long before success arrives. Charles Rolls was the kind of man who could enter a room and make it feel larger. He was ambitious, charming, well-connected, and endlessly fascinated by the future of motoring. Henry Royce, by contrast, was quieter, more severe, and obsessed with getting things right. He did not care for show. He cared for precision, for silence, for the invisible details that most people would never notice until they were missing. In the early days of the automobile, that difference mattered. Cars were noisy, unreliable, and often more trouble than they were worth. They broke down on rough roads, rattled over cobblestones, and demanded patience from anyone bold enough to own one. Many manufacturers accepted that as the price of progress. Henry Royce did not. He looked at the machines around him and saw flaws everywhere. Not acceptable flaws. Not harmless flaws. Flaws that would one day define whether a car deserved respect or ridicule. When Rolls and Royce were introduced, something powerful took shape between them. One man could sell the dream, and the other could build it. It was the perfect partnership for an age that was still deciding what the automobile could become. Rolls had the vision to place their name before the right people. Royce had the discipline to make sure the machine would survive the spotlight. Together, they were not just chasing sales. They were chasing an idea, one dangerous enough to ruin them if they failed. And then came the promise that changed everything. Royce, with the kind of calm confidence that makes a room go still, declared that he would build the best car in the world. Not one of the best. A statement so bold it sounded almost reckless. But once those words were spoken, there was no retreat. Every component, every engine part, every finish had to live up to that promise. If you have ever made a public commitment and felt the weight of it afterward, you understand the pressure that followed. Promise can inspire. It can also become a test you must survive. So the work began, and it was relentless. Test after test. Revision after revision. Noise that should have been silent. Vibration that should have been absent. A flaw hidden in one place could undo the whole reputation. And somewhere in that pressure, under all the labor and pride, a legend was beginning to take shape. But the car that would prove whether Royce's promise was genius or madness had not yet arrived. And when it did, the world would finally understand what perfection can cost. In the early days, Rolls-Royce was not yet a legend. It was a gamble, built on a dangerous kind of confidence. The belief that reputation could be earned not by noise, but by silence, not by spectacle, but by precision. Charles Rolls understood the power of image, the kind of trust wealth and status could inspire. Henry Royce, on the other hand, cared little for appearances if the machine underneath did not deserve respect. Together, they created a partnership that was equal parts ambition and discipline, and from the beginning that balance set them apart. Royce would spend long hours in the workshop, studying every component as if it were a moral question. If a part rattled, it was not acceptable. If an engine vibrated too much, it had to be changed. If a finish looked elegant but hid weakness beneath the surface, it failed the test. He was known for his relentless attention to detail, and for men working under him that could be exhausting. But it also created something rare in the motor industry of the time. A standard that did not bend just because production was difficult or expensive. And that difficulty was everywhere. Cars in those years were often unreliable, noisy, and demanding. Buyers expected breakdowns. Mechanics expected repairs. But Royce refused to accept those limits as fate. He treated every flaw like an insult to the promise of the brand itself. In a world where many companies were content to make a vehicle that merely worked, he aimed for something far more dangerous. A machine that worked so well it seemed almost impossible. That ambition came with consequences. Testing was relentless. Parts were revised, replaced, and tested again. Delays were expensive. Mistakes could damage more than a prototype. They could damage the belief that Rolls-Royce stood for something higher. And yet, that pressure did not weaken the company. It sharpened it. Every setback forced a better solution. Every correction made the next version more refined. Slowly, Almost stubbornly, the car began to live up to the claim behind it. People started to notice. Not because Rolls-Royce shouted the loudest, but because its cars did something others could not. They inspired confidence. A passenger could sit inside and feel not just comfort, but composure. The road still existed, of course. The imperfections of the world had not disappeared. But inside a Rolls-Royce they seemed to fade. And that is where the real tension begins, because once a company promises perfection, ordinary success is no longer enough. The question becomes whether the standard can survive reality itself. And when the silver ghost enters the picture, that question will be answered in a way few could have predicted. By the time the first serious prototypes were rolling out, the promise had already begun to weigh like steel. It was no longer just a phrase spoken with confidence in a room full of admirers. The best car in the world had become a standard the entire company was expected to chase, inspect, correct, and defend. And when Henry Royce set his mind on something, he did not allow comfort to soften the edge of the work. There were mornings when the workshop felt more like a laboratory than a factory. Men moved quietly between frames, tools, and engine blocks, aware that one misaligned component could send the whole effort back to the drawing board. Royce would arrive, look over a chassis, listen to a faint mechanical rattle, and stop everything. Not because he was difficult for the sake of it, but because to him, a small flaw was never small. It was a crack in the promise. If the steering felt too heavy, it had to be improved. If the engine gave off the slightest vibration, it had to be refined. If the finish on a panel failed to satisfy his eye, it was rejected without hesitation. Charles Rolls, with his instinct for prestige and public image, understood the power of that obsession even when it made business harder. He could see what others could not yet fully grasp. That luxury was not merely about leather seats or polished metal. It was about trust. A wealthy buyer did not want noise, uncertainty, or excuses. He wanted to feel that every mile had been anticipated before it was ever driven. Rolls knew that if Royce could deliver that level of certainty, the name would carry farther than any advertisement ever could. Still, the cost of perfection was brutal. Each revision consumed time and money. Each improvement raised the standard for the next one. And in those years, when rivals were satisfied to move quickly and sell loudly, Rolls-Royce chose a harder path, to move slowly and be remembered forever. That decision could have destroyed the company. Instead, it created a machine that did something almost magical. It didn't merely perform. It disappeared into its own excellence. Then came the silver ghost and everything changed. On the road, it was eerily quiet, so smooth and composed that drivers and passengers alike would speak in lowered voices, as if they were traveling inside a sealed promise. Its reliability became part of the legend. Its refinement became the proof. People began to talk about it not as a car, but as an experience, a standard, a benchmark that others could only chase. And yet, beneath the success, one question still lingered in the air. If a company could build a machine this refined by refusing to accept imperfection, what else might that kind of discipline be capable of? That is the real lesson hidden inside the legend of Rolls-Royce. Greatness is rarely born from comfort. It is born when someone is willing to place a public promise above private convenience, and then live with the consequences. Charles Rolls understood the value of prestige, but Henry Royce understood something even rarer, the burden of standards. Together, they created more than a car. They created a reputation so strong that it had to be earned 1 mile, 1 adjustment, 1 silent, flawless journey at a time. And when the Silver Ghost finally proved itself, gliding almost noiselessly over rough roads, it did not just impress drivers. It changed expectations. People no longer asked whether a luxury car should be reliable. After Rolls-Royce, they assumed it must be. That is what real excellence does. It raises the floor for everyone else. It turns ambition into a benchmark. Of course, that kind of promise is dangerous, can expose weakness, can invite failure, can make every mistake public. But it also creates something most brands never touch. Trust so deep that it becomes part of the name itself. Royce did not build perfection because it was easy. He built it because, once spoken, the promise had to mean something. So maybe the question is not whether we should fear promising too much. Maybe the better question is this: what would happen if we treated our own work, our own word, with the same seriousness Royce demanded from every machine that left his hands? In a world that often rewards speed over substance, that question still matters. If the story reminded you that quality is never accidental, give the video a like. And think about this: what promise in your own life would you be willing to defend with that same kind of discipline? If you want more stories about the brands, people, and decisions that shaped automotive history, subscribe now, because the next one may reveal another surprise hiding behind a name you already know.